All right. Hi, everybody. So today you're going to get one of two lectures on the history of Jewish Messianism. And just a little bit in this first lecture, I'm going to go over just some Jewish history in general, because, of course, that's important to understand when it comes to talking about Messianism, because, of course, Israel was a theocratic society. This was a theocracy, and so Israel's history is rooted in its traditions of Israeli religion and Messianism, which is all hand in hand. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. Again, this will be one of two. Let me share my screen here with you. All right, so a few key terms before we get started. I just want to address the word or term Tanakh. This is in reference to what you traditionally would think of as the Old Testament. So this is an acronym that stands for the three divisions of Hebrew scripture, which is Torah or the law. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the Pentateuch. This includes the first five books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then we have the Nevi'im, or the writings of the prophets. So you'll know these as the main prophets: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. But then you have the lighter, or sometimes what are referred to as the minor prophets. Um, Also, the Ketuvim, or writings of religious poetry, or what's often referred to as wisdom literature. Another term that I want to reference is what is often referred to as the personal name of the Israelite God. I've spelled it out here on the screen, but what you won't hear me do is use this word out loud. And that's because even though this word appears more than 6,800 times in the original Hebrew scriptures, it's considered highly sacred and what Jewish people refer to as ineffable or unutterable. So instead, what's often used by Jewish theologians is the acronym that's sometimes referred to as the Tetragrammaton, which is Yod He Vod He, and this is translates literally to four letters, because this Tetragrammaton is comprised of the four Hebrew letters Yod He, Vav, and He, and in Hebrew there are no vowels, so the concept is to insert them by assumption, which is what has been done to create what is often pronounced out loud. This is considered an abomination because we don't actually know what they should be. So to create such a highly personalized name for God without using the actual name is considered inappropriate and even offensive. So when you hear me say Yod He Vod He, I'm referring to the Israelite God, and what is often considered the Christian God as well. So, or what is the Christian God? So, eschatology is what we're discussing in these lectures that I'm giving you. And this is the study of end times or final destiny theology. In Western society, our eschatological traditions tend to follow the Messianic traditions of early Judaism, which Christianity, of course, is a byproduct of. And this Messiah of these Messianic traditions is typically expressed as some personal or cosmic redeemer. And Messianism requires a belief in a divinely ordained redeemer or harbinger, creator of a new promised kingdom or world to come. That's the key factor. This Messiah figure always brings about or offers a promise of this new, better world in the sense of a cosmological term, which it doesn't have to be, but in a cosmic sense of a Messiah, there always has to be this new world to come, which then, of course, requires the imminent destruction or end of the world that we're in. And again, this is all, even in modern terms, this is all born out of these ancient concepts of Israel and Jewish traditions. So let's get started. So the origins of Israeli Messianic traditions come out of this word Messiah, which is actually from the Hebrew Mashiach. And this was a bestowed title that literally translates as anointed or anointed one. Now, this is never used in the Tanakh to refer to a specific person. There's no Messiah in the Tanakh in the sense of this one ultimate figure. It's always used as a descriptive title for people or things in relation to this anointed status. So again, in the Tanakh, there's no eschatological or spiritual figure who is the Messiah, right? This is all a concept that does get evolved and developed later in post-biblical scriptures in the Jewish tradition. So, in the sense of the early Tanakh, the Messiah develops in the Judeo-Israelite tradition in a threefold concept over time. This begins as a prehistoric tribal Goel figure who is a redeemer of clans. And then there's the anointed office or position, which initially starts off to include priests and prophets, as well as objects. And then, of course, there's the anointed king for divine rule. And we can trace the origins of Messianism and we can trace the development of these concepts beginning in prehistoric times and then into early history via the study of biblical scripture, as well as post biblical literature and archaeology. So we can trace the roots of Israel's history back to approximately 1800 BCE. This is a time when nomadic tribes, Semitic tribes, were wandering from Canaan, or wandering into Canaan from the east. These clans, these Semitic clans, were predominantly polytheist. They were tied together by bloodlines. No essential state law, of course, because they were nomadic. And according to the Tanakh, it's during this time that Yahweh appeared to Abraham, a patriarch figure in these clans, and told him to go and raise a great nation. And this, and the Tanakh establishes these concepts of a covenant with Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh, with the chosen people and with the promised land. And this marks the beginning of the development of monotheism among these Semitic Hebrew speaking peoples. And so, according to the Tanakh, this is when Abraham goes and settles in Canaan. And this is where we can talk about in these early nomadic tribes. Before there's any kind of settlement in Canaan, this is where we get the earliest concept of a messianic redeemer, and this evolves out of a figure known as the Goel among these early Hebrew-speaking people. And this is a time, again, remember, where there's no official law. Any kind of justice that's accomplished is done through blood feud. So this Goel was a patriarchal figure that was established within each family or clan unit who, whenever somebody was done wrong in their family, it was their job. It was their expected that they would go out and get retributive justice for those in their family done wrong. And we can find references to this in the Tanakh that describe this time, as we can kind of trace this development. And we can see this in Leviticus and Ruth, as well as Deuteronomy and in many scriptures. And as this nomadic society, tribal society settles down, we can also trace scripture in the Tanakh also gives us examples of how sociology kind of transitions into theology, right? So the Tanakh gives us more than 60 examples of Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh acting as the new Goel to the Israelites after Abraham has this interaction with Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh. Deuteronomy 15:15 is a great example of this. And so we can see also the transition from tribal to state justice and how that transition goes hand in hand with Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh being the new Goel, redeemer of the Israelites as a whole. And then from this point, once we have the establishment of Israel as a nation, Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh is not only just the Goel redeemer of the people, but also of the nation. So we have the development of this concept of a messianic office or status, and that now there still needs to be these individuals here on earth who can ensure that the works on earth conform to the desires of the Goel Redeemer of Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh, as the father or patriarch of all of Israel. And so people and objects become appointed to special positions or roles via this ritual anointment, usually with holy oil. Um, and so this is often applied to figures like high priests and prophets, and we can find examples, which I've provided some for you here from the scriptures where we can see this. And also temple instruments were often anointed, where we can see reference to their Messianic status or Messiah status as an anointed ritual object. And this develops into the concept of anointed king status, and it leads to the rise of royal theology within Israelite tradition. And so this concept of adoptionism is brought in, and the earliest kings of Israel, as well as all Israelites, are then deemed as the children or sons of God, of Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh. And we see this, we can trace this and relate this very similarly to concepts that we see in Egyptian religion, wherein the king is divine, as a divine figure on earth, right? Who is adopted as the son of the gods, and represents a divine status on earth. Very similar concept in the sense of royal theology in Israel tradition. So this develops into eventually into Davidic royal theology. And so we see this play out first with Saul. Saul begins very much as kind of this war chief king, almost a Goel redeemer figure, right? And he's anointed via popular proclamation by Samuel. Um, and this happens in First Samuel's. And then we see this continue with David, who's first secretly anointed and then publicly anointed. And it's in Second Samuel 7:11 where we have the story of David's messenger Nathan, who receives a message from Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh, who tells Nathan that he's going to create a house for David, that Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh is going to create an eternal Davidic dynasty over Israel. And this is the root of royal theology in Israelite religion. And this establishes this concept of the divine right of kingly rulership in Israel, and also the concept of an eternal Israel, right? And so this continues in First Chronicles. Solomon, the son of David, is anointed as king. And this offers the fulfillment of Yod-Heh-Vod-Heh's promise of the eternal Davidic dynasty. This is where it begins. And according to the Tanakh, this is continued for 400 plus years under the reign of at least 22 kings and one queen. And so we don't just have scripture to follow this. We can look at some archaeological evidence as well to kind of supplement the stories that are provided in the Tanakh. So we have this Egyptian stela, the Merneptah stela, dated approximately 1220 to 1230. Actually, that should be 1230 to 1220 BCE. And this is the first external evidence for tribes of Israel. And when I say external, I mean external to scripture. In this stela, it makes a comment or note of Israel being exterminated. Its seed is no more. And then in approximately 1000 BCE, according to scripture, this is when the tribes of Israel unite into one kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon. And according to archaeology, we do have examples of Hebrew writing in the Khirbet Kiafa Ostrakhan. And this is the earliest example of Hebrew writing. So we do know that there was an established Hebrew people around this time. And then we also have a little bit later on in 950 BCE, we have the Gazer calendar, which is an ostrakon featuring lunar data in Hebrew. So we do know again there at this time there's an established, settled group of Hebrew people who are tracking the movements in lunar data, and Scripture would match this. According to Scripture, the Hebrew people charted their time based on the movements of the moon, not the sun. So this would also coincide with Israelite religion. And in 930 BCE, approximately according to Scripture, we have the divided kingdoms. We have the establishment of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea. And around the same time, approximately 850 BCE, we have the Tel Dan stela discovered in northern Israel, which references a house of David, giving us concrete evidence of the existence of some Davidic dynasty in some capacity. In 850, 800 BCE, we have the Mesha stela found in modern Jordan, which references kings of Israel. And in 722 BCE, we know that Assyria conquers Israel. Assyrian inscriptions describe an attack on southern Judean kingdoms. And it's around this time, according to scripture, that the northern tribes disappear and disperse. And in 586 BCE, we know that Babylon conquered Judah. And in 585, a year later, Jerusalem is conquered. And it's around this time that, according to scripture, that the first temple is destroyed and all the elite Israelites are exiled from the Holy Land. And this corresponds to what we do know of historical um, events at this time. We know that most kingdoms who conquered others, Babylon in particular, Babylonians would always exile the elite leaders of an area and make them disperse because that's how they ensured that there wouldn't be an uprising. If you take the leaders of a community and the strongest figures available and you kick them all out, then you know that they can't rise up and reclaim their land. So at this point, the reason I go through all this is because it's important to understand the Israelite people as a conquered people. And this is a people in a nation who were repeatedly conquered, exiled, and put through this experience of being kicked out and brought back. And in 520 BCE, the Persians conquer the Babylonians, and under the Cyrus the Great, something happens. Right, there's a promise. We have evidence of this as well in a Syrian calendar, where he promises to free all the ethnic prisoners, and so. And scripture tells us that the Cyrus allows Jews to come back from exile and return to Jerusalem. And so this offers a unique turning point because this marks the beginning of what is often referred to in Jewish Israel history as the post exilic or restoration era. It allows, according to scripture, for the reconstruction of a new temple in Jerusalem. And this is critical because the temple is the center of Jewish life. You can't have an Israel religion or Israelite religion or Jewish religion in this time without a temple. It's absolutely essential because again, the temple is the seat where they create a holy space for God to come and sit and rest on earth. This is where they create a seat for Yad-Heh to be with them. This is the seat of power for priests on earth, and so this is absolutely necessary. And so this concept of Davidic royal theology, which has become so essential for Israelite Jewish religion at this time, is critical and dependent upon the existence of this temple in Jerusalem, in this space. And so this is restored with the establishment of the Persian Empire, because this is what allows there to be a new hope for a Messiah or a Davidic king, right? Because now this concept of a Messiah in Jewish tradition has been closely tied together with royal theology and the establishment of this Davidic line. And so now the fact that they've been able to rebuild the temple provides new restored hope that there will be a new Davidic king and the reestablishment of Israel as a nation, all of which goes hand in hand with the theology for Israelites. So let's talk about, at this point, you've heard me say Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. And I know for a lot of people, this can be really confusing. For me in particular, when I first started studying Jewish Israel history, this was a key thing for me to understand. And so, really quick, I just want to touch on that. So, the word Hebrew is a word that is never used by the Israelites themselves. They never refer to themselves as Hebrews. This means from across or to pass over. This is a name that's given to Abraham and his followers by others. So, who are referring to the worshipers of Yud-Heh-Vod-Heh. So, whenever you hear, if you're reading something, maybe you're reading historical document or a post-biblical document and it references Hebrews, that's a key term for you to know that means you're not reading something that's written by worshipers of Yud-Heh-Vod-Heh. This is going to be a term that's only used by people outside of that religious practice who are referring to those people. And then we have Israelites. This is a term that comes from Abraham's grandson, Jacob, who's renamed Israel, which means he who has wrestled with God. And this ties back to scripture. And Jacob's descendants are referred to as Israelites. So this is the term that's used by the Israelites to describe themselves as a religio-ethnic population. But this is what's used prior to Babylonian exile. Once they are exiled from Babylon and Israel is no more, and they return to Judah under the reign of the Persians, they can't really call themselves Israelites anymore because, once again, Israel doesn't exist anymore. So at this point, they rename themselves after Jacob, Israel's son, who is Judah. And this is the title that's bestowed by themselves to this remnant of Israelite elites who come back after the Babylonian exile. Unfortunately, this era of restoration, of course, as we all know, any of us who have any experience in ancient history at all, we know that this doesn't last long. In 333 BCE, Persia and by default, Judah are conquered by Greece, by Alexander the Great. He subjugates the Jews. And then in 167 BCE, things really escalate under Grecian control as the temple is desecrated. One of the Grecian rulers, Seleucid rulers, orders that Greek statues of Greek gods be erected within the Jewish temple. And this, of course, is a complete abomination it makes the temple nearly not only, but they might as well have been lit on fire. The temple is desecrated, no longer holy by these actions. And this leads to revolts. In 167 to 161, you have the Maccabean revolt, and this is what's described in the first and second chapters of Maccabee. And in 164 BCE, the Maccabeans rededicate the Temple of Jerusalem. And we find reference to this in scripture, which I've cited for you here. And this is the origins of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, known as the Feast of Lights. And so in 141 BC, we have a renewed period of Jewish independence. From 134 to 67 BCE, the Hasmonean rulers take claim of a restored Israel. And so this continues until 63 BCE, despite many efforts by several Jewish rebels. At this point, all of the Middle East is conquered by Rome. And again, Jews fall under the rule of foreign leaders. And to top it all off, from 40 to 4 BCE, they have a new king. Herod the Great is named king of Rome by the Senate. And this, of course, is just a devastating blow to any hope for the concept of a messianic king, because at this point there was hope that, well, there could be you have lots of post-biblical literature describing hopes for a new Messiah to come that would not only rule Israel, but take over all of the Roman Empire, and all of the Roman Empire would be called Israel, and there would be a restoration, and in the underneath this coming Messiah, and the prophecy of the return of the Davidic king. But once Herod the Great is named king, it really just kind of just dismantles this hope. And to top it all off, Roman temples and fortresses are built in Judah, and in even worse, in the holy city of Jerusalem, at the capital of Judah. The temples are completely just desecrated beyond any concept of hope. And again, the very idea of the Jewish people as a sovereign nation, or independent people, is just completely stripped away. By 30 BCE, all the temples are totally overhauled, and even the sacred Jewish priesthood is taken over. So this concept of a sacred, not only did you have a sacred bloodline for the king and the Davidic kingship, but also priesthood in Jewish religion was passed on through bloodlines. And so this was a very sacred concept. And then Rome places uh priests in the Jewish priesthood that are Romans, and not in line with the bloodlines. And so this just really abolishes any hope, and leads to, again, to a lot of renewed rebellions within the Jewish people, who are just desperate to find anyone who can save them. And in 70 CE, the second temple is completely destroyed after all the rebellions. Rome says, this no more. You guys don't get to even be Jewish anymore. There will be no more Judaism. There will be no more temple. And so now all hope for a legitimate king and priest Messiah to rule over Israel in accordance to these prophecies is lost. And it's at this time, during the first and second century, that we really start to see the development of these post biblical concepts of an eschatological Messiah. Since all hope in a worldly Messiah, a worldly new king figure that's going to come and lead the Jewish people to redemption and restore Israel as a nation, that is gone. And so the only thing left to do is to redevelop these ideas and concepts into a spiritual redeemer. And that's where we really start to see these concepts flourish in post-biblical literature among the Jewish people. But keep in mind, there are still these older traditions that are still adhered to. It's expected that this Messiah will still have that this Messiah who's going to provide them with some sort of spiritual redemption is going to, some concepts look to the Davidic line, some concepts look to the priest line, and so there's all these different ideas floating around. But one concept that stays true is that this Messiah will bring an end to the Roman Empire, and will bring an end to the world as they know it, and start the beginning of a new redemptive kingdom on earth, wherein Jews prosper. And so that is a across the board understanding, even though there's a flurry of different ideas on how that spiritual Messiah will return. The key understanding is that they will bring about um, a new kingdom on earth wherein Jews will prosper and be able to practice their religion freely. So, on that note, I'm going to end today's lecture, and I'll bring you another one where we start to get into those ideas more. And we'll look at how they get adopted into the Jesus movement and how that inspires early Christianity.